They told us humans broke easy. That was the first lie. There were others, but that one I carried into the cold like a blade I trusted, and it was the first to snap in my hand. My name does not matter to you. In my tongue it is a sound your mouths cannot shape, a click and a fall of air, the way a stone settles into snow. So call me what my own kind called me when I was young and certain and stupid. They called me Spear Second, a boy with a rank, a boy who had never watched anything die that could look back at him. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest. I did not come to your stories to make you feel proud. I am not here to flatter the soft world that birthed your kind. I am here because I am old now, and my hands shake, and there is a debt in my chest that has never stopped beating, and the only way I know to set it down is to put it into words and give it to the dark. So listen. This is how I learned why your people are spoken of in whispers across 40 systems. This is how I learned why the oldest soldiers in my fleet would not say the human word out loud, the way you do not say the name of a thing that might hear you and turn its face toward your bed. It began on the ice. We came down on a moon called Cold Harbor by the ones who built there. A small place, a nothing place. It hung at the edge of a dead gas world, a frozen pebble caught in a giant shadow, and on its surface humans had cut a station into the rock like a tick burrowing under skin. A way station. A place where your ship stopped to drink fuel and breathe air and trade dull cargo before crossing the long black between the warm systems and the cold. There was nothing there worth the price of taking it. I know that now. There was a fuel depot and a relay tower and a handful of dome roofs and maybe 200 of your kind living their small lives in the dark. Nothing worth a fleet. Nothing worth a single ship. But that was never the point. My people did not come for the fuel. We came because the conquered above me had decided it was time the galaxy remembered who we were. And to remind the galaxy of a thing, you must break something small and let everyone watch. Cold Harbor was meant to be the lesson. A clean kill. A short one. A thing we would do between the rising and the setting of that moon's tired little sun, and then we would lift off the ice with human blood frozen on our boots, and the galaxy would lower its eyes when our shadows passed. That was the plan. I believed it the way you believe the floor will hold your weight, completely, without thought. I was on the third lander. We came down through the moon's thin breath in a wedged 9 craft, each one carrying a full talon of warriors, and through the viewport I watched the ice rise up to meet us, blue and white and cracked all over with old fractures like the skin of something very old that had been left out in the weather. The station lights were small below us, soft and yellow. I remember thinking they looked like the eyes of something already sleeping. Beside me sat the warriors I had trained beside since I was a hatchling. Big ones, hard ones, old enough to have killed before and young enough to still want to. The Talon leader was a creature named, well, call him the Warden. That is close enough to what the word meant. He had survived 3 campaigns and wore the proof of them in the notches cut along the ridge of his crest, and when he spoke, the whole lander went quiet, even the ones who feared nothing. He spoke to us once on the way down, just once. He said the humans were a young species. He said they had grown soft on their wet little worlds, that they had never truly bled, that they kept no warrior traditions worth the name. He said they would scatter the moment we landed, that some would run, that some would beg, that all of them would break because that is what soft things do when something hard finally arrives. Do not hesitate, he told us. Mercy is a thing you give to your equals. These are not your equals. Finish quickly. Be home before the cold takes the light. And we believed him, every one of us. We pressed our palms flat against the deck in the old way, the way warriors do before they spend their lives, and we waited for the lander to open and the cold to come in. The doors opened. The cold came in. And we went out onto the ice to teach the lesson. I want you to understand how it felt in those first minutes, because you have only ever heard the end of this story, and the end of a story is a liar if you do not know the beginning. In those first minutes it was easy. It was exactly as the Warden said. We landed in the open ground between the domes, in the wide flat where your ships once set down to trade, and the humans were not ready. How could they be? We had come out of the dark with no warning and no demand. There was no negotiation. There was no chance for them to surrender because we did not want their surrender. We wanted the lesson. The first ones we met were not soldiers. They were workers, people in heavy suits with tools in their hands, caught in the open between one shelter and the next, and they froze when they saw us the way small animals freeze in a light, and the warriors of my talon fell on them without slowing their stride. I will not soften this for you. I will not pretend I stood apart and clean. I was there. I was one of them. I raised my weapon and I did the work I had been raised to do, and the first life I took was a human in a yellow suit who had dropped his tool and raised his empty hands. And I did not stop, because the warden had said not to stop, and I was a boy who did what the hard old creature told me. His hands were so small. That is the thing I remember. Smaller than mine, soft-looking even through the suit. He had raised them not to fight but to ward, the way a child puts its hands up against a blow it knows it cannot stop. And then he was on the ice, and the ice drank him, and I stepped over him and kept walking. It was easy. That is the shame of it. It was easy and it was quick, and for a little while it was exactly the lesson we had come to teach. We pushed through the outer domes. We broke the doors. We went room to room through the places where these humans had built their small, warm lives, and we found them and we did the work. And the few who fought back fought badly, with tools and with old cutting lasers meant for ice and with their fists, and we cut them down and felt nothing but the clean, cold certainty of a thing going as it should. The warden ranged ahead of us, vast and unhurried, and where he passed the snow turned dark, and I followed in his wake and thought, this is what it is to be the hard thing that arrives. This is what it is to be the lesson. I thought I understood the whole of it. I understood nothing. The first crack in the lie came at the relay tower. The relay tower stood at the center of the station, a spike of dark metal rising out of the rock, and it was the one thing the Conquered above us truly wanted silent, because as long as it sang its signal out into the black, the warm systems would know that Cold Harbor still breathed. The warden took us toward it. A clean objective. Kill the signal. Kill the lesson into the galaxy's ear. But the humans had reached the tower before us. Not many. A dozen, perhaps, fewer. And they were not workers now. These were the station's defenders, what passed for soldiers in a place that had never expected to need any, and they had taken position at the base of the tower in the broken ground, behind fuel drums and machinery and the bodies of the dead, and when we came across the open, they did not run. That was the first wrongness. They did not run. The warden had told us they would scatter. He had said it like a law of the world, like the cold or the dark, and here were a dozen soft little humans behind their drums, and they did not scatter. They steadied. I saw it through the smoke. I saw the small movement of them settling lower, pulling tighter, the way a thing settles when it has decided to hold a place with its body. And then they fired. I had been told humans fought badly. The ones in the domes had. But these were not the same. These were the ones who knew the ground, and they had given up their dome and their warmth and their lives in advance, in their own heads, before we ever arrived. I understand that now, though I did not then. And a creature that has already given up its life is the most dangerous thing in any galaxy, because there is nothing left in it to bargain with. The first of us to fall was a warrior named for the river he was hatched beside. He went down with a human round through the joint of his armor, the one weak seam at the shoulder, and he did not get up, and a sound went through the talon that I had never heard before. Surprise. We were surprised. We had come to teach, and the small soft things had killed one of us in the open ground. The warden roared and drove us forward, and we went, because that is what we were, and we crossed that broken ground under their fire, and we reached them, and it became the close work, the bad work, body against body in the smoke, and even there, where our size and our strength should have ended it in a breath, they did not break. There was a human at the base of the tower, larger than the others, broad through the shoulders, and when our warriors came over the drums he met them with a length of pipe, just a length of metal pipe, and he swung it like he had been born swinging it, and he broke a warrior's crest with it before 3 of us bore him down. And even on the ground, even crushed, he was reaching past the warrior, killing him, toward a smaller human behind him, pushing them back, shielding them with the last work of his dying body. I saw that. In the middle of all of it, I saw that one thing, and I did not have a name for the cold that went through me, colder than the moon's cold, when I understood what he was doing. He was not fighting to live. He had stopped fighting to live some time ago. He was fighting to put his body between the small one and the dark for one more breath, and one more, and one more. We took the tower. We killed the signal. The warden stood over the dead defenders, breathing hard, and counted our own losses on his fingers. 4 warriors down to a dozen humans with bad weapons, a thing that should have been impossible, and I watched him count and I saw, for the first time, something in him that was not certainty. But he shook it off. The old ones are good at that. He turned to us and said the humans had fought like cornered vermin, and that vermin sometimes bite, and that the bite of a dead thing means nothing. He told us to move on. There was still the fuel depot. There were still the deep shelters where the rest of them had run. And we moved on. But the lie had cracked. I had felt it crack. I had heard the wrong sound in our own ranks, the sound of surprise, and once you have heard a hard old creature sound surprised, you can never quite unhear it. The deep shelters were cut into the rock beneath the station, where the humans kept their reserves of air and warmth, and it was there that the day stopped being a lesson and started being something else. Something I did not have words for in my own tongue, and have spent the rest of my life trying to find them in yours. We went down into the dark. The shelters were a warren. Narrow passages cut through stone, low ceilings, tight corners, and our size that had been a weapon up on the ice became a curse down there in the close dark. We could barely move 2 abreast. The humans knew the warren and we did not. They had grown up in it. They knew which corners turned and which dropped and which doors could be sealed, and they used all of it. They did not meet us in the open down there. They had learned. They struck from the dark and fell back. They sealed doors behind us and opened them ahead. They cut our lights. And one by one, in the close stone dark, my Talon began to die. I want to tell you about the medic now, because this is where I first saw her, though I did not understand what I was seeing. We had pushed into a wide chamber, the only wide space in all that warren, and the humans had pulled back from it, and there were wounded everywhere. Theirs and ours. The fighting had rolled through this room twice and left it full of the broken. And in the middle of it, in the worst of it, with our warriors not 30 paces away and closing, there was a small human kneeling in the blood. She was small even by human measure. I learned her name much later, and I will give it to you now so you do not have to wait for it the way I did. Riva Calderon. But in that moment she had no name. She was just a small human kneeling where any sane creature would have run, and she was not fighting. She was healing. She had a kit open beside her, and her hands were moving over a wounded human soldier, fast and sure, pressing and binding and doing the small frantic work of holding a life inside a body that wanted to spill it. And she did not look up when we came into the room. She did not reach for a weapon. She knelt in the open with our warriors 30 paces away, and she kept her hands on the wound, because the wound was losing and the boy beneath her hands was going to die if she stopped, and so she did not stop. One of our warriors raised his weapon at her. I do not know why I spoke. I have asked myself that question for more years than you have been alive. I think it was because she was so small and her hands were so sure, and she did not look up. And there was something in that, in a creature that small refusing to look up at the thing that was about to kill it, because to look up would be to take her hands off the dying boy. There was something in it that I could not name and could not let be ended by a single shot in a dark room. I told him to hold. I do not know what authority I thought I had. I was a spear second, a boy with a rank. But I told him to hold, and he held, and we stood there, my whole knot of warriors, and we watched a small human finish the work of saving an enemy soldier's life while we decided whether to take hers. And she finished. Her hands stopped moving. The boy under them was breathing, I could see it, the rise of his chest, the thing she had wrestled back into him. And only then, only when the work was done, did Riva Calderon look up. She looked up at a room full of armored killers, at a dozen weapons pointed at her face, at me. And she did not beg. She did not scream. She looked at us the way you look at weather, the way you look at a thing too large to argue with. And then she looked down at the next wounded body. There were so many, and she shifted herself over to it on her knees, and she opened her hands, and she began again. She began again. I have killed many things in my long life. I have stood in rooms thick with the dead, and I tell you that nothing I have ever seen frightened me the way that small human frightened me in that moment, when she looked away from our weapons and back down at the wounded and started again, as though we were not there, as though we were the smallest of her problems, as though death itself were just a thing she had decided to keep losing to her for as long as her hands held out. The warden came into the room then. He saw her. He saw us standing, not firing. He understood in a glance what was happening, and he did not understand it at all. Kill it, he said, not it as in her. It as in the whole problem of her, the whole impossibility of her, the thing she was doing to the certainty he had built us out of. Kill it and move on. And the warrior beside me, the one I had told to hold, looked at the warden, and looked at the small human kneeling in the blood with her back to us, healing the enemy while the enemy's killer stood at her shoulder. And he did a thing I had never seen a warrior of my people do. He hesitated. He hesitated, and in the close stone dark of that human warren, with the warden's order hanging in the air, I felt the whole shape of the day shift under us like ice giving way. Because if a warrior of mine could hesitate at the killing of one small soft thing, if the lesson we had come to teach could be cracked by the simple sight of a creature that would not stop healing, then we had not come to teach a lesson at all. We had come to learn one. And we did not yet know how much it was going to cost us. The warden killed her himself. I need to tell you that before anything else, because I have spent my life telling this story in my own head, and every time I have wanted to stop here, on the place where I could have stepped between them. I did not. When the warrior beside me hesitated, the warden crossed the room in 3 strides, and he did the thing none of us would do, and Riva Calderon fell across the body she had been trying to save. Except she did not die. I will come back to that. Hold it in your mind. The warden killed her and she did not die, and the not dying of her became the thing that broke us. But you have to walk the path I walked to understand it, so let me walk it. When she fell, something happened in that room that I have never been able to fully describe in any tongue. The wounded humans, the ones she had been healing, the ones too broken to stand, they began to make a sound. Not a scream. Lower than that. A kind of groan that moved from body to body across the chamber floor, the sound of the helpless watching the one person keeping them alive go down into the blood, and I felt that sound in the floor of my chest, in the old place where my own hatchling fear used to live. And then the lights went out. The humans had cut the power to the whole warren, all at once, total dark, and in that dark the thing we had been doing to them they began to do to us. Up on the ice in the open our size and our weapons had made us gods, but the warren was not the ice. The warren was theirs. They had built it. They knew every turn of it in the black the way you know the inside of your own home with the lights off, and we knew none of it. And the moment the dark came down, the hunters became the hunted. I heard the first of us die in the dark before I understood what was happening. A wet sound and a fall close by, and then the warrior was simply gone, and there had been no flash, no shot, nothing. They were killing us with their hands now, with knives, with the cutting tools meant for ice. They came out of the side passages we did not know were there, and they took a warrior down into the dark and were gone before the rest of us could turn. The warden's voice came through the black, ordering us to form up, to put our backs together, and we tried. But you cannot form a wall in a warren built to break walls. The passages forked and forked again. Whole sections of us were cut off from each other by doors that slammed shut in the dark, doors the humans controlled, doors I did not even know were there until they were closing. I was separated from the wardens not within the first minutes of the dark. 3 of us pressed into a side passage, and then a door dropped behind us with a sound like a tomb closing, and there were 2 of us, and then the human cutting tool came out of the wall. Out of a maintenance slot we had walked past without seeing, and there was one of us. Me. I want you to understand the fear because it was a new fear, a fear my people did not have a word for, and I have spent my life borrowing yours. We had come down to this moon certain of one thing above all others, that we were the predator. That whatever else was true, we were the hard thing and they were the soft thing, and the hard thing eats the soft thing, and the order of the world is fixed. And in the dark of that warren, that certainty died. I crouched alone in the black with the body of my last companion cooling beside me, and I understood, all at once and far too late, that I had never been the predator at all. I had simply been a large animal that had wandered into the den of something patient. The humans were not stronger than us. They never had been, but strength is a small thing, I learned that day. Strength is the smallest thing. What they had was worse than strength. They had a refusal so deep it had no bottom. We had come to kill 200 of them, and instead of breaking, every single one of them had decided, somewhere in the first minutes, before we even reached the domes, that if they were going to die, they would spend their dying making us pay a price the galaxy would remember. That was the lesson. They had taken our lesson and turned it inside out. We had come to teach the galaxy to fear us. They were teaching the galaxy to fear what it costs to make a human decide to die. I tried to find my way out. I crawled through the dark, through passages I did not know, and everywhere I went I found the work the humans had done. A warrior caught in a collapsing tunnel they had rigged to fall. A warrior drowned in a chamber they had flooded with the freezing slurry from the fuel processors. A warrior, the warden's own second. A creature I had thought unkillable, pinned beneath a machine they had dropped on him from above and left to die slowly in the dark, alone, the way he had left so many of theirs. They were not cruel. That is the thing I have struggled my whole life to make my own people understand, on the nights when any of us could still speak of it. The humans of Cold Harbor were not cruel. Cruelty wants the other to suffer. What I crawled through that night was not cruelty. It was something colder and more terrible. It was a kind of grief that had turned into precision. Every trap, every drowned chamber, every patient knife in the dark. It was made by people who had already lost everything, who had already buried their own in their hearts, and who had decided that the least they could do for the dead was to make the killing of themselves the most expensive thing the conquered had ever attempted. I found the warden near the deep core of the warren. He was the last of his knot. I do not know how he had survived when so many had not. He was the hardest of us, perhaps that was all. He was backed into a corner of a junction chamber, and around him in a half-circle stood the humans, and they were not rushing him. They had learned what rushing the big ones cost. They simply stood, weapons up, and waited, and bled him with patience the way they had bled all of us. I came into the chamber behind them. I had my weapon. I could have fired into their backs. For a moment, one moment that I have replayed more times than there are stars over Cold Harbor, I raised it to do exactly that. And the warden saw me. Our eyes met across that chamber over the heads of the humans who had not yet noticed me, and I waited for him to give the old signal, the one that meant strike, the one I had followed all my life. And he did not give it. He looked at me, and in his eyes there was a thing I had never seen in the eyes of any warrior of my people, and it took me years to name it, and the name is this. He was ashamed. He had told us they would break. He had told us mercy was for equals, and these were not our equals. He had built us into the hard thing that arrives, and he had marched 2 talons of us down into the dark to die proving a lie, And now he stood in his last corner and looked at the one warrior left who might escape, and he did not want me to die proving it too. He gave me a different signal, a small one, a flick of the crest that in the old tongue of warriors means only one thing. Go. Live. I lowered my weapon. I backed out of the chamber, and the last thing I saw of the creature who had raised me into a killer was the warden of the ninth Talon turning back to face the patient humans alone, lifting his weapon not to win, he could not win, and he knew it, but to make the ending of himself cost them one more breath. The way the broad human at the tower had done. The way the small medic had done, kneeling in the blood. He had finally understood them in his last moment, and the understanding had remade him, and he died the way they died, spending himself to buy nothing but time and dignity. I ran. I ran through the dark warren with the sounds of the wardens ending behind me, and I do not know how long I ran, only that the passages turned and turned, and I had no light and no plan and no people left in all that frozen rock. And somewhere in the running, I stopped being a soldier and became simply a thing that wanted to live. I do not know what brought the ceiling down. Perhaps it was a trap I triggered. Perhaps it was the violence of the day finally catching the old rock. Perhaps it was nothing, just the moon settling on its bones the way old places do. But the passage came down on me in the dark, all at once, a weight of stone and metal, and I felt my own body break beneath it, the great strength of me, the thing I had been so proud of, snapping like the small bones of the human in the yellow suit I had stepped over a lifetime ago that same morning. And then I was pinned, alone, in the dark, in the cold, under the rock in the deep of a human warren on a frozen moon at the edge of nothing, with my Talon dead and my warden dead and my certainty dead, and I could not move, and the cold began to come into me through the broken places, slow and patient, the way everything on that moon was patient. I was going to die there. I knew it with the same completeness I had once known I was the predator. I lay under the stone and I felt my life leaking out into the cold, and I thought about the human in the yellow suit and his small hands and the way I had stepped over him. And I understood that I was going to die exactly as he had died, pinned by a thing too large to fight, alone, with my hands too weak to do anything but ward against the dark. I closed my eyes. I waited for the cold to finish me. And then in the black I heard a sound. Footsteps, light ones, small ones. A light bloomed in the dark, a small handheld light, a human light, and it found my face where I lay pinned and broken under the stone, and behind the light, kneeling down into the cold beside the enemy that had come to murder her whole world, was a small human with sure hands and a med kit open beside her, looking at me the way she had looked at the wounded boy in the chamber. The way you look at a thing that is dying. The way you look at a problem you have already decided to keep losing death to, for as long as your hands hold out. It was Riva Calderon, the medic, the small soft thing the warden had killed. Except she had not died. Her armor had stopped his blow barely, badly. She would carry the ruin of that day in her body for the rest of her life, and she had crawled out from under the boy she had been saving. And instead of running for the surface, instead of fleeing the dark while the dark was busy killing the rest of us, she had gone deeper. She had gone down into the warren in the black, alone, toward the sounds of the dying. Toward us. To find the wounded, any wounded. It did not matter to her hands whose blood it was. She found me pinned under the stone, the enemy, one of the creatures whose own leader had struck her down hours before, and she set her light where it would shine on my broken places, and she opened her hands over me, and I understood, too weak to speak, too broken to move, with the cold already deep in my chest. I understood that I was about to learn the last and worst of all the things Cold Harbor had to teach. I just did not yet know if I would live long enough to bear it. She should have let me die. I have said this to her in the years since. I have said it more times than was kind. And every time she has looked at me with that same flat, weather-reading patience, and she has said the same thing back, and I will give you her words exactly because I have carried them like a stone in my mouth. You were dying in front of me. That's the whole sentence. There's no second half to it. There is no second half to it. That is the thing my people could not understand. That is the thing I did not understand, pinned under the stone with the cold in my chest, watching her sure small hands open over my broken body. We had built our whole war around the idea that there is always a second half to it, that mercy is a transaction, that you give it to your equals and withhold it from your lessers, that it is a thing weighed and measured and spent, that it depends on who the other is and what they have done and whether they deserve it. And Riva Calderon knelt in the cold over the enemy whose people had murdered her world that morning, whose own leader had struck her down hours before, and there was no second half to it. There was a thing dying in front of her, and there were her hands, and that was all the math she had ever needed. She worked on me in the dark for a long time. I do not know how long. I drifted. The cold pulls you down, and each time I surfaced she was still there, the small light still burning, her hands still moving, doing for my alien body the same frantic patient work I had watched her do for her own kind in the chamber. She did not have the right tools. My anatomy was nothing she had ever trained on. She worked by guess and by feel, and by a stubbornness that would not let the thing in front of her finish dying. And somewhere in that long dark, she stopped the leaking of my life and held it inside me by the strength of her refusal alone. And when she could not free me from the stone herself, she was too small, I was too large, the weight too great, she did not leave to save herself. She braced the collapse with her own body and the broken machinery around us, and she stayed in the cold with the enemy, talking to me the whole time though I could not understand the words, her voice low and steady and unhurried, the voice you use on a frightened animal until the others came. The others, the humans, the survivors of Cold Harbor, what few of them there were, came down into the warren when the fighting ended, came looking for their own dead and their own wounded, and they found their medic in the deep dark, bracing a collapse with her body, keeping one of us alive. I want you to understand what that was. These were people who had watched everyone they loved die that day. These were people standing in the ruins of their entire world, and the thing that had ruined it was me, was my kind, and there I lay, broken and helpless and entirely in their power, the last living warrior of the force that had murdered their home. They had every reason to finish me, every right by any law I understood. The warden himself in their place would not have hesitated and would have called the hesitation weakness. They argued. I heard it even drifting. There were voices raised. There was a man, I learned later he had lost his children in the domes that morning, his whole family, everyone, and he wanted me dead, and who in any galaxy could say he was wrong? He stood over me with a weapon and he wept and he wanted me dead. And Riva Calderon stood up from where she had been kneeling over me, this small broken woman, and she put herself between the grieving father and the helpless enemy, the way the broad man at the tower had put himself between the dark and the small one, and she said, I have this from the others, who told me later, because I was too far gone to hold it myself. She said only this. If we do it now, we become the thing that came down out of the sky, and I didn't keep him breathing so we could become that. And they did not do it. That is the whole of it. That is the lesson of Cold Harbor, the real one, the one we never came to teach and could never have taught, that a people grieving their entire murdered world could stand over the helpless author of that murder with every right to vengeance, and choose, by the thinnest, most exhausted, most broken margin, not to become what had been done to them. They carried me out of the dark. They put me in their own infirmary, in a bed meant for their own wounded, and Riva Calderon and the few medics left alive kept me breathing through the long, cold days that followed, and they fed me, and they mended my broken body with tools never made for it, and not one of them in all that time ever made me pay for what I was. The relief fleet came eventually. Not mine never came back. The conquered above had seen the cost of Cold Harbor, and quietly decided the lesson had taught the wrong thing and was best forgotten. It was a human fleet that came, drawn by the silence where the relay tower used to sing, and they found a station of 200 reduced to a handful of survivors. And they found those survivors keeping an enemy warrior alive in their own infirmary, and they could not understand it either. And the survivors of Cold Harbor said the same thing to them that Riva had said to the grieving father. And slowly, the way water shapes stone, the story began to move out into the warm systems. Not the story we had come to write. Not fear them, they are the hard thing that arrives. The other story, the true one. They will fight you without mercy when their backs are to the wall. Every soft little one of them, down to the last, will spend their dying to make your victory cost more than it could ever be worth. That part is true, and that part alone would be enough to make a wise species step carefully around them. But that is not why the legends fear them. The legends fear them because of the second thing. Because after the human has fought you without mercy, after you have done your worst and they have done theirs, after the blood is on the ice and the dead are counted, when you are the one lying broken in the dark, when you are the one whose whole world is ash, when every law and every right says they should finish you, the human will kneel down in the cold beside the thing that tried to murder them and open its hands, and there will be no second half to it. That is the terror of your kind, not your violence. We have violence. Every species in the dark has violence. It is the cheapest thing in the galaxy. It is that we can never predict where the mercy will stop, because it does not stop where ours stops. It does not stop at the borders of the deserving. A human will hate you with its whole heart and pull you from the fire with the same hands, and you will never, ever know, not in the moment your back is against the wall, not in the moment theirs is, which human you are facing, the one that will kill you or the one that will save you, because the terrible truth, the one that empties the bowels of every old soldier in 40 systems, is that it is always both. It is always the same one. It is always both at once. You cannot war against that. You cannot plan around it. A species that will fight you to the last breath and then bind your wounds is a species that has broken the oldest law of the dark, that the hard thing eats the soft thing, and that is the order of the world. Humans do not obey that law. Humans looked at that law and decided, somewhere on their wet little world long before they ever reached the stars, that they would be the exception to it, and they have been the exception to it ever since. And it is the most frightening thing the galaxy has ever encountered. I am old now. I told you that at the beginning. My hands shake. I have lived my whole long life in the warm systems, among your kind, because there was no home left for me among my own, and because there was a debt in my chest that has never stopped beating. The debt is this. A small human with sure hands knelt in the cold over the worst thing she had ever seen, and she did the math she had always done, the math with no second half, and she gave me back a life I had not earned and could never repay. And I have spent that life telling this story to my own kind first, the few who would still listen, and now to yours, because it is the only repayment I have, to make them understand. To make them all understand, across all the dark, the thing it took the death of 2 talons and a whole murdered moon to teach me. Riva Calderon died last year, old in her sleep, surrounded by people who loved her, which is more than her world got and exactly as much as she deserved. I was there. I held one of her small, sure hands in my great broken one at the end, and it was the same hand, the same one, that had opened over me in the dark on Cold Harbor, and I told her the thing I had never quite managed to say in all the years between. I told her she had been right, that there was no second half to it, that I had spent a whole life learning the truth of the sentence she said to a room full of killers, kneeling in the blood, refusing to look up. And she squeezed my hand, weak as a hatchling, and she smiled, and she said the last thing she ever said to me, which I will give you now, and then I will let this story go at last into the dark where it belongs. She said, "You stopped to tell me to hold. In the chamber, you were the first one of them who ever stopped." She had remembered. All those years she had remembered the boy with a rank who told the warrior to hold his fire. That's all it ever takes, she said. One of you stopping, that's where it starts. And then she was gone. So that is the story. That is why the legends fear you, not because you are the hardest thing in the dark. Because you are the only thing in the dark that will fight a war without mercy. And then, when it is over, look down at the broken enemy at your feet and stop.